Hi, I'm Sean. I've always been curious about the answers to life's big questions. It was inevitable that one day I'd seek these answers from others on a similar path. My intention with these conversations is to inspire you, to challenge you. I'd like to invite you to think outside the lines. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Think Outside the Lines podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest today. She's a leadership coach and talent acquisition consultant on a mission to end burnout and help leaders and business owners bring more kindness into their business. She's also the author of the book Practical Kindness and the co-host of the podcast Doing Good Business. Now, I've got to say that kindness is something I think about a lot in my life, especially at a time when most of our time is spent staring at a screen and less time interacting with other humans. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I encourage you to listen with an open heart and an open mind, and take some of the wisdom that is shared, and go out there and spread some kindness today. It's time to think outside the lines with Lara Heacock. Tell me what you're doing to make the world a better place.
I am trying to bring kindness into the corporate world. So I have a 20-year background in corporate America, and everything that I do in the coaching realm has always been based on a foundation of kindness. So I when I first started coaching, ran screaming from the corporate world and then realized I had a lot of expertise in that area and ended up working with people in that realm and decided that I wanted to get back into it and see if I could change the thing that I decided to leave.
Yeah, and I want to actually dive in really deep to running screaming from the corporate world, because I think a lot of people probably echo that sentiment. So I did want to share with you really quickly that I thought was kind of cool that I went for a run this morning and someone was wearing a shirt that said human, period, kind, be both.
Oh,
and
I love that.
I just felt like that is the most appropriate thing for me to see on the morning of this interview. So
I was going to say, how cool is it that that's the day that you saw it?
Totally.
I love that.
No such thing as coincidence.
I agree.
I want to say right off the bat that I can't love your mission more than I do.
Thank you.
And of course, I'm really excited to help you spread this message. I want to say that kindness is probably one of my favorite words. And I think it's also one of my favorite actions to take. Because I think to me, it's the most simple way to show somebody that you see them and that you're present with them. And I think that aside from maybe love, at our core as humans, I think it's the most basic expression of who we are. So I would love to hear your definition of the word kindness and why it's a word that's so important to you.
Yeah. So I actually wrote about this a couple months ago. So the difference between nice and kind, I think kind is active. I think nice, and I'm using my air quotes, not that you can see me, but I think nice is often that person who smiles at you at the water cooler and, maybe even asks how your kids are doing or something like that. But then behind your back, they're often maybe saying some not so nice things. Whereas I think kind can be a gesture as simple as, I'll give an example. I was sitting at a restaurant bar with a girlfriend one night last week and just was talking to the woman behind the counter. And I was like, your hair is awesome. Just taking that minute out of, a meal with a friend to compliment somebody else, or it can be, much further. It can be helping a homeless person that you see. It can be, in the corporate world, being an ally for the minority in the room. Kindness to me is active and it's intentional, and it is, it goes far beyond just like surfacey niceness.
I actually really love that, because I'd like to think of myself as a nice person, but because I am a human being, I'm sure that I have, quite confident actually, that I have moments where I'm not so nice, right?
Same. Nobody's perfect in this room.
Totally. But I love the idea that kindness is like, it's a specific action that you can take, because I think that that's what we can strive for, right? Because I hope that my underlying tone as a human is that of nice, but I love that I could, even if I didn't feel that way about myself, I could go out right now and do something that could be a kinder action, right?
Yeah. And I mean, kindness can be activism. Kindness can be giving a voice to the people who are traditionally muffled by society. Kindness can be, putting a grocery cart back in the parking lot. There's so many different ways, but I think for me, the real differentiator is that it is, it's action based and it's far beyond surface.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to break this conversation down a little bit further. So, I want to talk about kindness toward ourselves. I want to talk about kindness toward each other, which we've already alluded to a bit. And then something that you specialize in, which I'm actually, like I said before, I'm really fascinated by, which is kindness in the workplace. So I'd love if you could maybe begin by talking a bit about kindness toward ourselves and what we can do to practice more of that.
So that for me is really where it all started. Once I learned that, so on one side of my business, I have sort of the personal blog, which is Kind Over Matter, and the other side, the corporate work lives at laraheacock.com. So in Kind Over Matter, that mission is really all about life is better when you're kind to yourself. And I learned that through, a bunch of stumbles and falls. And I was not super kind to myself for a really long time. I am a recovering perfectionist. I'm a pretty driven type A person. So really starting with that foundation of being kind to yourself, because I do believe that the relationship you have with yourself is the foundation for the relationship you have with anyone else. So be that a partner, a friend, a colleague, a team. And I will say, even when I am in corporate and I'm working one-on-one with a leader, it all still starts in that same place. It all still starts with being kind to yourselves. And most often, our leaders are feeling burnt out because they're, sometimes getting into the cycle of not having anything in their life that brings meaning and not doing any of those things that are kind for themselves, like, taking time off, or even, thinking about their thought processes differently, not berating themselves. It's not kind to be rude to yourself and to treat yourself differently than you would treat someone that you love. So there's a lot of crossover between, the personal and the self-kindness, and even, how it translates into the professional world.
Okay, so recovering perfectionist. I feel like we could do an entire episode on that.
Might
have to have you back for that one.
Sweet, I'm
in. You talk about the quote unquote lather, rinse, repeat cycle that most of us go through in life, and I know that in your coaching with your clients, part of your mission is to eliminate the gray that a lot of us feel as we go through the motions in life. Yeah. Do you have any specific tips in terms of daily actions we might take to practice more kindness toward ourselves, or how we might stop living surrounded by so much gray? Because I think that's really vivid, and I'd love to kind of hear you expand on that a bit.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is always, let's bring some intention back into life. When I talk about getting in that lather, rinse, repeat life cycle, what I mean by that is, you get up, whatever family or personal responsibilities you have in the morning, you go to work, you do your thing, you go home, you do the same personal responsibilities at night, and you go to sleep and you wake up again. And, if you've ever looked at the back of a shampoo bottle, a lot of times it says lather, rinse, repeat. And I think life can often start feeling that way, where we lose touch with the things that bring us joy. We lose touch with the things that fill us back up. I talk a lot with my clients about the analogy of a pitcher of water. And if you have a pitcher of water, it only holds so many glasses of water. So when you pour out a glass for your family, and you pour out a glass for your work, and you pour out a glass for your team, and you pour out a glass for your leaders, and you pour out a glass for, volunteering with your kids, when you get to the point of the pitcher being empty, there often hasn't been a glass of water that you've reserved for yourself. So the very first thing that we do is start looking at what can we do to fill that pitcher back up. So when all of these things are taking away and taking energy out of your physical existence, how can we put it back in? So for some people, it's very active and it's movement, and it's going out and getting back in touch with something physical that they used to love. And for a lot of people, and I fall into the second category, it's actually slowing down. So for me, a huge thing that's made a difference is I replaced a morning snooze habit with doing a 10-minute meditation on Insight Timer, and not even get out of bed. I just, instead of hitting snooze, I bring up Insight Timer and I do that. So for me, that is how I start my day with my own self-kindness practice. And it brings that intention back to everything that I do the rest of the day. So we always start with intention. And I like to think of it as kind of spelunking with my clients, because when you are in that lather, rinse, repeat area and everything is feeling gray, we often don't know where to start. People are like, I don't even know what makes me happy. I don't even know what brings me joy. I can't tell you the last time I did something that was exciting or was just for me or, felt really good. So we start by doing a little bit of that spelunking and digging, like, okay, tell me about a time when it didn't feel like that. What were the elements that were present at your life? So if we were looking at a recipe, there would be ingredients to it and there would be an outcome. So if the outcome in your life is that time when it actually felt more exciting and you maybe jumped out of bed with a little bit more pep, what were the ingredients that helped you create that end result or that outcome?
I love that. I have to ask you a question though. How do you meditate in bed first thing without falling back asleep?
It's real tricky. It's real tricky. I do the guided meditation. So I listen to, I let it walk me through. I won't say I've never fallen back asleep, but I'm usually pretty good about
Yeah.
not falling back asleep. And the guided really helps because I can focus on, what the person's saying. And, they tend to be somewhat instructive.
Yeah, I can only do guided meditation, but honestly,
Same.
that for me is like because I love the idea of I've tried every trick in the book to like jump out of bed, leave my phone on the other room, whatever. But like that snooze button can be my best friend sometimes.
I know.
And I love the idea of like starting to meditate right away, but I just don't. I feel like I'd fall back asleep, and then it would freak me out.
Yeah, get curious about it. See what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
you never look. There are some mornings when I do a snooze and a meditation. Like again, like totally, no one is perfect in this room. But yeah, I am also not a jump out of bed person, and I'm at the age where I have aging parents, and I love the concept of leaving your phone in the other room, but I'm a little too like of a nervous person in general. I'm like, oh God, but what if something happened in the middle of the night? You know what I mean? So I have my phone set on. I have like do not disturb hours, so only emergency numbers would get through, but I still feel better sleeping with it next to me, and I don't feel like it takes away.
It's funny you said that about your parents because my parents are actually getting ready to move like significantly farther away. And obviously they're also getting older, right? And so I actually have that same fear because I do leave my phone on the other side. I moved it from the kitchen, which I was doing for a while, which is actually like, if you can do that, it's a great feeling to just know that like the second you wake up, you can't get to your phone immediately. But yeah, like that emergency call in the middle of the night thing is kind of what makes me apprehensive.
I'm with you. And look, I think that it's a great concept. I love, all the work that Arianna Huffington is doing now. And I think that, intellectually, I love it as an idea, but for me, it just doesn't work. And I think that's another thing that is so important. I always joke, like, this is why they make chocolate and vanilla. The right thing isn't right for every person. So what's right for you, Sean, might not be right for me, might not be right for, our clients, our peers, our partners, whatever it looks like. But, getting to know what individually self-kindness means to you, right? So for me, part of it is a 10-minute meditation in the morning. It's being intentional about my actions. It's making sure that, I try to have like a computer-free weekend day, if not both days. There are certain things, but it's really about getting to know yourself and what works for you. And, leaving my phone in another room wouldn't work for me. I would be too nervous. It would actually have the opposite effect.
Totally. And I think for me, like I talk about meditation on the show all the time because I profoundly believe in its importance. But it really is something that can change your life. And I think that like that, I guess that term can be kind of thrown around loosely too often, but meditation will change your life. If you have a meditation habit every day, I promise you it will change your life however you wish for it to.
So can I tell you what I just found out about how meditation changed my life?
Tell me, please.
So, I mean, like, first of all, it helps me like really seriously ramp down the tightly wound person that I can be at times. But
same.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Like, but I knew that, like, I can feel that in my daily experience, and I was clear. And it's my habit is not every day because, again, not perfect. But I aim for at least 3 days a week, if not 5. And sometimes I hit 7, and that's great. So that's kind of the space that I'm in with it right now. But it's been consistent in that space for about a year to a year and a half, probably not quite a year and a half. So I just had a physical a month ago. My cholesterol went down. My blood pressure went down. I made Zippo changes to my diet. I have not seen the inside of a gym in 2 years.
Wow.
It's really like that is the only variable that has changed in my life is that consistent meditation practice. And again, by consistent, I don't mean perfect. It is not every day.
Yeah.
It's been about 3 days since I've done it this week, but I was like mouth agape.
Wow, that's amazing. In fact, again, I could do an entire episode on that just because it's so like there's so much data behind what you just suggested even.
Right.
That's so like it's crazy to me. But trust me, like if you can find a great, like if someone listening right now can find an amazing guided meditation, and like I've had to search. In fact, to be quite honest with you, I've had to make my own sometimes. And I kind of vacillate between, back and forth between ones that I found that I really like, and then ones that when I want to be really intentional with something, I will, create my own. But yeah, meditation, life-changing. I think I also really love what you said about, because listen, we all experience those gray areas in life sometimes, those gray times in our lives where nothing feels very colorful, nothing feels very exciting. And I think it's really important, your suggestion of like finding those things that work for you. I know for me, like music and nature are my two, and especially if I can combine those two elements, that resets me in ways that like I can't explain. And so I think that it's really important to find those things for you that can kind of like be your anchor back into, I don't know, a more colorful life. I like that. I like that description.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it's when you know yourself, I think that it brings back so much of the power that we often give away, because when you know yourself and you're clear on your values and you're clear on who you are, it is much easier to get out of the comparison trap, to step away from stressful situations, to even just think about things differently. It changes your perspective, because I can sit here and say, like, okay, you went for a run this morning. That's awesome. Running is totally not my thing, but I don't have to feel bad about myself and think, oh, well, I should run because Sean runs and, he seems like he's got it going on and all that. Like, no, I'm cool. Like, I know that's not the thing that is going to fill me up and make me feel, that like life is got some meaning and some color back into it.
It's so funny that you say that, because living in Los Angeles, like a lot of people here do like CrossFit, which if you're listening and you don't know what it is, it's like this really high intensity training where you run around and do a bunch of crazy things. And I feel that way about CrossFit. Like, I literally can't go to a CrossFit. I have no interest whatsoever in that, but people do.
You and I share that.
Totally. I mean, honestly, I think
people love it.
I think most people would share that sentiment, but there are people that love it. And it's weird because I struggle with that a little bit, because not anymore, but like in the beginning when it was becoming really trendy, I was like, oh, I should go do this. But I have no aspiration in that realm.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, anytime, like, okay, listeners, anytime you hear the word should coming in through your own head, that's an instant symbol that you're in that place of like judging yourself and not feeling really grounded. Like, that's, to me, that's actually one of the trigger words I share with my clients. When you hear that word should, it's an instant sign that you get to pay attention. Like, think about, okay, this is the time where I'm sort of judging myself or feeling like something should be different. Like, okay, what's really going on here? Let me take a look. Why am I feeling like I should do that? And then how do you get back to your own values and integrity?
100%. Let's move on to kindness toward each other, because I think that there is so much chaos going on in the world right now, especially given our current political landscape in the States that is really polarizing. And I'm asking this question on behalf of people listening, but also for myself, because I have really conservative family members. What can we do to practice more kindness toward each other? And maybe what I think might be most important, like, how can we remind ourselves to practice this when it tends to be the last thing on our mind as we go through our hectic and busy lives every day?
So I think, you mentioned the conservative family members. I think that, I believe in, a kindness practice is talking to, not about. So I don't need to go and talk to, my cousin about our Uncle Bob because, man, wasn't he a jerk at that family dinner when he was like, saying something that was anti-woman or something. Like, I need to go talk to Uncle Bob and say, gosh, I know that we have different views and I can respect our differences as human beings, but that really felt personal to me and it felt disparaging and it hurt my feelings. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that Uncle Bob is going to turn around and say like, wow, Laura, I'm really sorry. I will never say anything disparaging towards women again. Clearly, we can't control that outcome, but there's a real big difference in talking to than talking about, and it has a major impact in how you go around. So that's kind of an extreme / silly family example. But in day-to-day life, being kind to each other, it can be as simple as, making eye contact with the person that you're buying your coffee from. Talk to, not about, 100% applies in the corporate world, especially. We have so many gossipy sort of back channels that happen in the corporate world. And, being kind in that setting looks a lot like talking to each other. If you're a leader, it looks like being consistent with your one-on-ones with your people. It looks like managing them individually instead of with, some sort of just, I'm going to manage everybody the same way ideation. But in our personal life, it's about, it starts with being kind to yourself, like managing your boundaries. If you are an overgiver or tend to be an overgiver, that will get you to a point of burnout. And then if you're anything like me, when you hit that point, you aren't showing up in the best way and you're not able to be kind towards your others. So it's making sure that you're, giving to a point that feels good, but also managing your time, managing your energy so that you can show up and be with the people that you say you're going to be with without feeling any sort of resentment because you maybe have overcommitted.
Yeah, I love all of that, actually. I think, not to digress on this topic too much, but the hardest part for me with the whole political thing and talking to people as opposed to, at them, I agree with you 100%. And I think you prefaced your statement with, I respect our differences, but, and I think what's really challenging for a lot of people that I've talked to in this current political climate is that you don't respect those beliefs.
And look, to be fully transparent, like there's a lot of beliefs out there that I don't respect.
Totally.
The kindest thing to do is walk away. Like if I can't have a conversation that starts out or is like some way that, if I can't have a conversation that's respectful, then I'm probably going to make the choice to walk away. Like I'm not going to try and argue with someone who tells me that, a 32-second-old fetus has more rights than I do as a 42-year-old woman. I'm not going to try and have that conversation with them because I I'm not able to get, maybe I'm not evolved enough yet, but I'm not able to get to that point of empathy and understanding and respect. But it also depends on the level of relationship. Like, you don't need to have that conversation with every person on the street or on Facebook. Sometimes the
Online, yeah, for sure.
oh, it's terrible online. Like, sometimes it actually is kinder. And, like, we all judge each other. And it's like, just because you don't see someone arguing, with the opposing side on Facebook doesn't mean they're not doing something. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's kind to go and ask them, right? Like, I'm not terribly political on Facebook. I also vote regularly and make calls and send letters and donate to the places that support the belief system that I have. So,
Totally.
Somebody may look at my online presence and say, like, well, she doesn't care about XYZ issue. I welcome the question. I welcome the ask. And, I think remembering some of that empathy is just thinking about, we don't know someone's full story no matter what we see them posting online, but also truly the kindest thing to do sometimes is walk away. Not every conversation is meant for you to have, but there are places where, and that again, it comes to boundaries. Like, if you manage that energy and that boundary, you can then have it in places where it maybe is important to you, like with a family member or a close friend.
Yeah. And part of the reason I'm spending so much time on this is because I think that it's so like timely to be having a conversation about this, because we're all experiencing this right now. And I love that, like, so much of your, like, what you're about is the element of honesty and realizing that, like, we're all a work in progress. Because yes, like I said earlier, like, I aspire to be nice, I aspire to be kind, although you do too, but we're not always going to hit that mark. And so, but the aspiration and the intention behind it, I think, is what's most important. Because I have those moments, especially with my relatives, where, to your point, the most appropriate thing to do in those scenarios is to truly just walk away and say, I'm not having this conversation with you. But then there's that part of me that's always like, well, maybe today could be the day that I could challenge them because, Trump did something particularly crazy last week and maybe they'll see now. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen,
Yeah.
And I love the idea that, like, you can maybe attempt that, but then fail. And that's okay. Like, that's part of life, right? I really subscribe to that notion.
No, I do too. And I think, that comes back to self-kindness. And I always say, like, you've got to do the thing that's going to let you be able to sleep at night. So how are you going to be able to go to bed feeling good about your actions? How are you going to be able to wake up and look in the mirror knowing that what you did? And that becomes the North Star for the choice. So the kindest choice is the thing that lets you go to sleep feeling okay about your action and feeling good about waking up and looking in the mirror. So whether that means you had that conversation and you did a little confronting with kindness, or whether you let it go in that moment because it wasn't the right thing and you recognize that you're not going to change their opinion any more than they're going to change yours. And, quite honestly, sometimes there are people in our lives that we, need to practice a little bit more acceptance around their issues if they are important to keep in your lives. And then there's some people that aren't, right? Like, it's all about levels and knowing, where do I want to expend that energy and where do I want to practice that acceptance, even though we're different. And, maybe lead by example and let them see, like, turns out you're not a terrible baby killer because you're pro-choice. Like, you can, look at that as maybe a way of making an impact on their person. It doesn't always have to be, super aggressive confrontation.
Totally agree. So I know you've alluded to this a bit, but I also know that a big part of your work is around kindness in the workplace. I would assume that it's kind of the last thing that people think of when making a hiring decision. But having worked in many a not so kind environments, I personally believe that it might just be the most important attribute we look for in a prospective employee. I'd love if you could maybe break down your theory on this.
Yeah. So this is another way that, like, kindness maybe looks different than some people would expect. Sometimes the kindest thing that you can do for somebody is to part ways with them, personally and professionally. So obviously in the workplace, if you're a leader, that may look like, letting someone go because it's not the right fit. Or maybe it just looks like, moving a team around and putting people in different roles because based on their strengths. So I think that kindness starts at the hiring process. It starts with how we walk our talk. So are we putting out a brand just to attract and retain talent, or are we actually walking that talk? I was at a company recently doing an event, and the chief people officer was on a panel discussion, and she had shared that one of the things that she hears most when people start is, oh my God, you guys really are this nice. Like, I thought it was just the interview process. So it is possible to actually walk your talk as a company and to practice integrity and to show up as who you are. So it starts in that recruitment and interview process. And then as a leader, it looks like making sure that you are, spending time with your people and you're developing them and you're creating a culture where, they can be honest and they can be transparent. And, I call it appropriate transparency. If you're a leader and you need to do a layoff, it doesn't mean you go into the meeting and you say, oh my gosh, I've been stressing about this all night. I haven't slept in 3 days. We've been over the budget a million times and we're so sorry we have to do this. It doesn't look like that. But what it does look like, even though all of that may be true, is that you go into a meeting and you say, you know what, guys, we made some hiring decisions based on a jump in our business about a year ago, and it turns out that was temporary. So we need to kind of go back to the size that we were. Here's how we've taken care of the people that aren't in the room anymore. And now we want to spend some time talking to you about why we believe that, this is the level we can maintain. This is our operating level. This is where we can do our best work. So that's kindness on sort of the other side of the spectrum. And then just in normal day-to-day professional life, if you are an individual contributor, I believe in bringing your whole self to work. I think that the days of, check your personal stuff at the door and check your work at the office door are gone. I actually do still preach work-life balance, but like most things I talk about, it looks a little bit different. It doesn't mean that you're at work for 8 hours and you sleep for 8 hours and with the other 8 you do all wonderful things that fill you up. It's a very realistic view of balance, which means that sometimes you're going to have to work 12, 13 hours a day, but that you build in some time after that to recoup and to fill yourself back up. So a lot of different components to it, but really looking at the whole life cycle of work through that lens of kindness.
I love that. I would also say that any company that has a chief people officer is probably on the right trajectory.
Pretty cool, right? I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I've worked for a couple of those, and I mean, it's drastically different in terms of the culture and just kind of how they proceed with the mission that you're describing. Do you have any specific examples of how we might practice kindness toward, like, let's say, a coworker that we might not be able to see eye to eye with? Or maybe a boss that's driving us nuts?
Yeah. Managing up is a real thing sometimes. I always like to think about being solution focused. I think that if you go in and consistently just point out to any other human, whether it's a peer or a boss or, an employee, if you're only consistently pointing out the things that are wrong, that has a real impact, and it doesn't tend to be a positive one. So I'll often work with my clients about going to their leader and saying, hey, here's what I noticed that's going on. Here's how I think we can shift it. Can we have a conversation about how we can work towards this proposed solution? Or, do you even agree with this proposed solution? Or what other options do you see? What alternatives do you think are out there? So really coming at things from a solution focused perspective, if you are the one who is kind of raising their hand and looking for something to solve. If you are the one that's charged with solving the problem, I think you've got to start with curiosity. So you've got to get, a diverse, inclusive group of people around the table. You've got to get really curious. There is not a single data point that points to anything other than diverse teams being the absolute most creative, most impactful, most effective. So gather a diverse set of people. Maybe they have nothing to do with the problem. Bring them in the room and start brainstorming and talking about it, because as I'm sure everybody knows, none of us can see the forest for the trees. Like, we're all seeing the tree, maybe it's even just a particular leaf, and you suddenly get an outside perspective and things open up that you never had any idea about. So I think that's a real practice of kindness in business, is to consult diverse opinions for problem solving and really lean into curiosity.
Yeah, I agree with that. I personally have a background in like Scrum Agile, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that is taught in that realm in terms of like self-organizing teams, and servant leadership and all that. Those are really interesting concepts to me that kind of are applicable in this scenario. I also really believe that these concepts begin and can only really truly be adopted when they start at the top. And that's like with the leadership team in an organization. What are some of the things that you cover in your executive training, and how do you help facilitate all this stuff if an organization wants to get started?
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to ask is, not everybody, but, most companies have a values page on their website, or, maybe their values are listed on the wall. So one of my first questions is, how would I know that? If I didn't see those values and I just walked into your company, I spent a week here, how would I know what they are? How would I see them operationalized? How would I see your people exemplifying those values? So I think that's a really important thing. I trust that nobody starts a company or steps into an executive leadership role and says like, I'm going to suck at this. Like, I don't think I really want to do a very good job at this. I'm just going to, collect this nice big paycheck and call it a day. I trust that most people, at least the people that are going to hire somebody like me, are not going to be of that mindset. So a lot of times it's reconnecting to, what did motivate them to create these values for the organization or to have this mission statement, and then did we lose it along the way? Have we lost track of it? It's normal and it's okay. So we don't have to go into a place of, oh my gosh, we're so far along and berating ourselves for that. We can actually just reconnect to, what initially got you excited about these values? What initially got you excited to take this job and to build this team? So really starting from that place and helping the leaders reconnect to kind of their purpose and what they're doing and maybe what they felt initially that they've gotten a little bit further away from.
Yeah. And I would also say that, maybe it's time to reevaluate that initial value statement or whatever. Like I worked for a company. Point. Yeah, I worked for a company that we actually went through and like revamped it and realized that some of this stuff isn't applicable anymore. We need to, what is our new objective? What are our new missions? And so maybe that's, another option.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing. And that's another great way to get a diverse team of people at the table. Maybe your employee base has changed in the last, 20 years since the company has established those values. Why don't we, check and see if they're still relevant to everybody that is here now? And if not, what do we want to move toward?
Totally. Do you have any cool stories about like maybe you can share with companies that have implemented these concepts and what the results were like?
So I think one of the biggest things that I saw was, so that layoff example that I shared earlier was from a client that I worked with previously. And what I saw was once that leader started really having those transparent, honest, in-depth conversations, she saw, engagement increase. She got feedback from people that she had never gotten before just by simply opening the door to have those conversations. So as soon as this happened, nobody wants to do a layoff. Like it stinks. There's no two ways about it. It never feels good. And what can happen is actually a more cohesive team is left behind once you do it in a way that is really, in integrity and practicing kindness. So she started getting so much information and actually found out things that proved that the folks who, unfortunately were laid off were the right decisions, and information that had never come out before simply because she wasn't leading in this particular way. But once that door was opened, the relationships improved, the work product improved, people started collaborating differently and making better outcomes and really actually hitting deadlines faster and coming up with more creative solutions.
I love that so much. You have some additional ideas in terms of how we can be more kind toward the earth. And I'd love if you could kind of briefly touch upon that, because I think that obviously it's a hot button issue right now, but I think that approaching it from like a kindness perspective could potentially be life-changing, literally.
Yeah. This is another one of those really divisive things that I've seen. I see on one side of the spectrum, there's people that are saying, one of the best ways that you can impact the environment is to stop eating red meat. And I see on the other side of the spectrum, people saying like, stop telling me what to do. It's the corporations that are killing the environment. Yeah. So I'm going to take the former perspective. I feel like if we all walk around thinking there's nothing we can do, we're going to prove ourselves right. So what would happen if we all walked around thinking I can make an impact and I'm going to make intentional, conscientious decisions that are, kind to the earth and kind to the planet? So an example is I have a good friend that lives a mile away. Sometimes I'll just walk over to her house. And one time I did that. And along the way, I just picked up all the litter that I saw along the side of the road and I put it in a trash receptacle. It looks like when I'm at the grocery store thinking about the packaging of the things that I'm purchasing. I'm a big Amazon user. That is an area where I could improve, right? Like progress, not perfection. I am not at all a perfect human being. So, there's definitely a way that I could be more conscientious with the waste that comes from things like that. But it comes down to thinking about, what is important to you? Is it maybe, is not eating red meat something that you want to do for the environment? Is picking up some trash along the way something you want to do? Can you look at the packaging? Can you look at buying clothing secondhand instead of new? Can you look at something like, where are these manufactured? And, is that Fiji water really worth it because it actually came from Fiji? Just looking at things differently. But I think it starts with coming from that perspective and that belief system of, I actually can make a difference. And if I don't, that's a guarantee that it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. And I think my question in this realm is what if, right? So I think to your point, like it can seem impossible, like no one's really doing anything and this isn't going to make a difference. But my question is, what if it could? And that's what I ask myself. Like, for example, I cannot stand paper straws and they are everywhere in Los Angeles. Like it's weird. Like the one thing, like a plastic straw that we take for granted of, the ease of use or convenience.
They work a lot better than the paper ones.
Oh my God. I hate paper straws.
Yeah, but, they suck.
Yeah. But the other day I was like, okay, first world problems, right? Like could be so much worse. And what if this could actually make a difference for the environment or for someone's, some animal that's not going to get pillaged by, this piece of plastic that I was using or something, right?
What if you buy yourself a sustainable straw that's not paper, right? Like you can buy a multi-use, really thick plastic, like I have a water bottle that has a really thick plastic straw in it. I could take that out and carry it with me, or I could buy a metal straw and take it with me. Like
It's true.
thinking again from that perspective of like, okay, I don't like this, but what else is possible? What else could I do? What if this is the thing that makes the difference?
Totally. So I know we've touched on some of the concepts, but I'd love if you can maybe talk a bit about your book, Practical Kindness, and what is the greatest takeaway that you hope to leave your readers with?
Yeah. So I arranged that book into kind of like the progression that I think the self-kindness journey takes. And it starts with foundation of being kind to yourself. And, really I want people, if that's the only takeaway, that's what I want it to be. I would love to live in a world where people started being kinder to themselves and people started, not being judgmental of themselves and not being so hard on themselves and not working themselves to the point of burnout and stressed out and, freaking out on people all the time unnecessarily. So that would be my hope for the biggest takeaway. And whenever I write, like I'm a blogger at heart, like I'm a 300-word person. I am not a novelist, at least not yet, but I always want there to be a tangible takeaway. And I think what you find in the book is that, it's really digestible. Some people really do it week by week. There's 52 different things in the book. Some people sit down and read it all at once. Some people open it up and see what, the universe wanted them to see on that particular day. But everything will be bite-sized and digestible. And a fair amount of it has actually something that you can implement or a practice that you can try to start really building up your foundation of self-kindness.
I actually love the idea of opening a book and asking what the universe wants me to learn today or see today.
I do too.
And so like I'm that person when there's like a 52 exercises, I'm like, okay, let's not go one by one. Let's go. Are you able to go out of order in your book? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. There's absolutely no order required. I always joke with my mom because when she gives you multiple gifts, there's always an order to them. So there's absolutely no need to read my book in order. Read it however you want.
Amazing. You alluded to your blog, but tell us a little bit about, it's called kindovermatter.com, right?
Yes.
And
I think of it as like an online magazine. So we have a bunch of different writers all throughout the week. I write every Monday, and my column is the Monday Motivator series. And all throughout the week, we have other writers. So we have a Kindness in Business series. We have a Love for Love series. We have a Kind Kindred series. And it's really just, people talking about their versions of kindness from their own perspective, whether it be professionally or personally or anything in between. And then on the weekends, we feature poets. So we have Poetry Corner on the weekends, and it's just a great place to come. I like to call it the feel-good rabbit hole of the internet because Kind Over Matter has been around since 2009. I took it over at the end of 2013. There is a lot you can get lost in, and it's all from that wonderful lens of kindness.
I love it so much. Tell me about your podcast, because you've got a podcast.
Yeah.
Too. All over the
Podcast
place.
is new-ish. I know. Podcast is newish. It launched in October of 2018. So we just hit our 6-month podiversary, and it's called Doing Good Business. I co-host it with an amazing woman named Kelly Stewart, and we look at things in the professional space from the micro and the macro. So I bring the micro perspective with the individual or the leadership perspective, and Kelly brings the macro of the company or the company's impact on the planet. And Kelly does consulting with businesses to help them bring a not just for profit mindset into a for-profit company. So we met and we kind of instantly hit it off, and we launched this podcast. And our goal for the podcast is to really show that there is a better way to do business, and we will pontificate about it till the end of time. But then we also invite guests on the show who are doing business differently. So it's one thing to hear us yammer on about, what it means to have values or how you bring kindness into business, and something very different to interview a leader in a company who is doing something differently. And we just had a guest on. It's two brothers who run a real estate company in California, and the episode won't be out until September. But they took the buy one, give one model, like if you think of Tom's Shoes or something like that, and they brought it into real estate. And I saw them on Instagram, and I stalked them, and they responded. And it was so great to talk to them because for every home they buy or sell, and they're in Orange County, for every home they buy or sell, they donate the funds to build a house for a family in Guatemala. And they take several trips over the course of a year to actually build some of those homes, and they invite clients to join on those trips with them. And it was so freaking cool.
Oh, it's so cool.
So cool. Casa Real Estate.
Nice.
I'll give them a plug because it's so cool.
For sure.
I was like, how are you doing that with homes? It's amazing. But like our whole goal is to prove that it can be done. We talk about the show being where personal and professional development meet. And I think that both always have to be present to be able to lead in a way that is, really that different.
Totally. I need to connect you actually with my friend Krista. She's a CMO at a company that's doing really cool things, and she's very intentional with like everything you're suggesting. So yeah,
Oh, yeah, that'd be
shoot you an
great.
intro for sure. So I ask all my guests this last question, but I'm particularly curious about your answer. Tell me what has you hopeful.
I'm going to be really honest and tell you that right now I am having a hard time answering that, just because it is like abortion bans akimbo all over the US
Yeah.
and it's really bumming me out. But what makes me hopeful is that I get a chance to vote really soon. And honestly, at the end of the day, what makes me most hopeful is the people that I love most in the world. One of my closest friends is doing something for herself that I am beyond proud of her for, and that makes me hopeful. And just when I see the good in the world, it's one of the things I love doing, or I love most about the podcast. You can easily find the bad, and we work really hard to try and showcase some of the good, and that always helps me trust that it is out there and you can find it. And sometimes you have to look for it, but seeing that it's out there really makes me hopeful.
Same, actually. I mean, that, to be honest with you, like I started this show before the 2016 massacre, but but
I love that.
but it's actually kept me going in kind of like reinvigorated ways. Because to your point, like that's the reason I asked the question, to be honest with you, because I think even if you don't watch the news, you just are aware of what's going on. And you care about what's going on, it can be very, very discouraging. And I think like these last couple of weeks in particular, I don't know. Like, yes, we get to vote soon, but I'm really hoping that like there's an election. And I know that sounds probably really dramatic, but like, does it? I don't know. But anyway, So like I said, I asked that question because I want to hear what people have to say in that realm, because I think it's really important to have something that keeps you hopeful and, what keeps you going, because it might be a different answer that resonates with someone listening. And so I love that you were honest with that question, but then you actually had a good answer. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, so like I said, I'm really in love with your mission, and I thank you so much for everything that you're doing out in the world. I also want to say special thank you to Kate Swoboda, who connected us.
Yay!
She's awesome. Please tell us how we can connect with you if someone listening would like to know more.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the corporate work is at laraheacock.com. The blog is Kind Over Matter. You can check it out all the time. All of my social media is under Kind Over Matter. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And then the podcast, if you're interested, is doinggoodbusiness.com. And we are in all the podcast places.
All right, I'd like to thank you so much for listening today. Now, if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, as it's the best way to discover new episodes of the show. And please be sure to share this episode with anyone you think could benefit from hearing it. Now, you can find the links for everything we talk about in the show notes, in addition to coaching services and so much more. Just head over to thinkoutsidethelines.com and feel free to drop me a line with any questions or feedback you have on the show. You can send an email anytime to hello@thinkoutsidethelines.com. Until next time, go out there and pursue your passion today, because the best way to predict the future is to create it. For more information, please visit thinkoutsidethelines.com.